Dauntless Bureau project with you. And it's been a pleasure to work with the staff of the Wadsworth Atheneum. I'd like to extend special thanks to those I worked more closely with. Curator Vanessa Segals, who first saw my work at the Newport Art Museum a few years ago and shared it with the curatorial team. Jema Holchin, thank you Jema. She presented this project to the board of directors and has been by my side throughout. And finally, thank you to Matthew Hargraves. It was his idea to have me interact with the Dauntless Bureau, which was just a bureau, not filled with these objects, and part of the Wadsworth Atheneum's permanent collection. It's been a wonderful opportunity. Now, I'm not a historian, however, I would like to take a moment to talk about the history of the Bureau and the family that owned it. So the Dauntless Bureau is called such because it was on the yacht, the Dauntless, pictured here. The Dauntless yacht was owned by Caldwell Colt. Caldwell Colt is the only son of Elizabeth and Samuel Colt, who survived to adulthood, age 35. He's the son I mentioned of Samuel Colt, who started the Colt Firearms Manufacturing Company in Hartford, Connecticut. You can see the Bureau here on the yacht in Elizabeth Colt's room. Throughout the making of this project, I found myself in a sort of conversation with Elizabeth Colt, and I used her as a point of reflection throughout. I began photographing hair as big changes were happening in my life, especially internally. I had just exited that all-intensive part of motherhood, and I must have been changing a little bit all along and not realizing it because those are very busy years. So it felt really sudden for me to realize that I no longer looked or felt the way I did before entering motherhood. And it caused a little bit of an identity crisis. It made me very self-reflective, and my internal dialogue of the time involved me telling and retelling my life story. And I was thinking what I wanted for the next part of my life. I knew of the Victorian practice of making memento mori, and that they used, as this exhibition wonderfully illustrates, they made jewelry, sculpture, and all kinds of things from hair as a way to honor both the dead and the living. I used the framework of that idea as a tool for self-reflection. And in my artwork, I made tintypes. Memento mori for the parts of myself I had outgrown, and those I wanted to foster. I also turned to creative mothers or role models and found them in artists like Louise Bourgeois, Maria Magdalena Campos Pons, Ana Mendieta, and Sonia Clark, who are also in this exhibition. I'm really pleased to say at this point, I have now been curated into exhibitional conversations with each of these female heroes. These artists used photography, nature, thread and needle, sculpture, and hair to address themes of identity, sexuality, and femininity. I began to move from straight photography to include sculptural work as well as video installations. This piece of memento mori pictured here is titled Family Portrait, and it is what led directly to the Dauntless Bureau commission. So this is made from a Victorian toiletry kit. It's a travel size kit, the size of a small suitcase. And you can see similarities between the top of this case and the Dauntless Bureau. There are little indentations to hold perfume bottles, toiletry bottles, brushes, and mirrors. And in the missing spaces in this case, I filled them with tintypes. I filled them with the little treasures that my kids handed to me through the years, so seed pods and rocks and leaves. What makes this a family portrait is that it includes hair from each of the members of my family. My son, my stepdaughter, myself, my husband, my mother, my stepmother, and my father. When putting this box together, I had everyone's hair was there but my father's, and I received his hair in the mail, taped to the back of a childhood photo. And in that moment, I had an incredible emotional response. My son and my father, both when they were infants, had the same little ducktail blonde curl at the nape of their neck. And I had snipped my son's, and that was in the box. And I could see on the back of this photo my grandmother, or I imagined, had snipped the same piece of hair from my father's head. And I felt this really strong emotional connection to my grandmother in that moment. And not as my grandmother, but as a woman who loved her son as much as I love mine. Sorry. And then that boy was my father. We all have these moments, right, where we realize our ancestors were real people. They lived lives, they fell in love, they had heartbreak. But for me, there are these moments, and this was one of them, when it feels like time flattens out and past and present exist at the same time. And I can feel that we are all connected by our very human existence. And it's that feeling that I'm chasing in the making of this work. It's what motivates me. And specifically, a feeling of being connected to previous generations of women. Victorians were fond of making memento mori, as I mentioned, but Elizabeth Colt went big. She built the Church of the Good Shepherd in memorial of her 4 children who died in infancy and her husband. Their son Caldwell Colt outlived the husband and the other 4 children. And she built the parish house in memento as a memorial for her son Caldwell Colt, who was the owner of the Dauntless yacht and this bureau. As I mentioned, he lived to age 35. Although his death was shrouded in mystery, the more prominent theory of the time is that he fell from the Dauntless and drowned while it was docked in Punta Gorda, Florida. Other news headlines reported that he died of heart disease, tonsillitis, suicide, and that he was murdered by a jealous husband. I too made memento mori for Elizabeth's children. It is every mother's worst fear to lose a child, and she lost all 5. Elizabeth had her children's baby silver melted down, spoons, cups, and rattles, and they were turned into communion trays that are used at the Church of the Good Shepherd. I think it was her way of taking this tragedy and putting it into service. Losing a child has been a fear of mine since long before I had a stepdaughter or son. My cousin drowned at the age of 19, and it was in that moment I realized we all could go, and at any time, but even worse, we could lose our children. I made memento mori for Caldwell Colt, her son who lived to age 35. I made this lac moratory, which is an ancient vessel believed to hold the tears of the bereaved, inside this perfume bottle from the Art Nouveau period. It contains seawater that was collected from Punta Gorda, Florida, where he died, and hair his color. When Samuel Colt entered his marriage to Elizabeth, he did so with a family history steeped in tragedy. His mother died when he was 6 years old. Of his 3 sisters, one died in child labor, the second of tuberculosis, like his mom, who also died of tuberculosis, and the third committed suicide by ingesting arsenic. The most famous Colt family tragedy is related to his brother John, who committed a gruesome murder that filled newspaper headlines of the times. He murdered a creditor over, I think the amount was $3.75. I'm not sure what that would be today. I'm guessing not enough for murder. He took his body, packed it in a shipping crate with salt, and put it on a ship bound for New Orleans and addressed to a fictitious person. The ship was delayed in New York Harbor due to inclement weather, and he was caught. He eventually committed suicide on the morning he was to be hanged. Although there are other rumors surrounding it, because there was a fire in the jail that morning as well. So some people think he escaped and he's still out there today. Keep your eyes out. It's that story that inspired Edgar Allan Poe's The Oblong Box, and it is also mentioned in Herman Melville's Bartleby the Scrivener. Recent scientific studies suggest we carry the effects of trauma in our DNA through the weakening of, in our cells through a weakening of our DNA's protective coding. This box that's in the bureau, I've placed braided hair across to represent those strands of DNA. The box also has a slot where people can write down their own family secrets or trauma, or their thoughts on whether or not they think familial trauma begets generational trauma. The box is unopenable, so any secrets will forever be held inside and live somewhere in the basement of the Wadsworth Museum. When touring the Wadsworth and learning about the Colt family, I was very inspired by these 3 miniatures of Elizabeth Colt, and they're on display next to the bureau after the talk. I hope you'll take time to look at them. They show her at 3 different stages of life. And I made this triptych in response. I thought about how much of my youth I spent dreaming of a future and thinking about the future, and how much now in middle age I spend thinking about my youth. This piece is titled Present, in recognition of how difficult it can be to see ourselves as we are in the moment. I've had the braids styled upwards as a way of representing an elevated sense of self-awareness. You can see these video installations on the balcony of the bureau. I have them pictured here. Brushing Through Time, number 1, my model with long dark hair, and Brushing Through Time, number 2, is my model with long gray hair. Together, these videos express the passage of time. I was thinking about how much time we spend brushing our hair in front of a mirror, and thinking that we start out in this world too young to brush our own hair, and if we live to a ripe old age, we may become too old to brush our own hair. And I'm considering the innumerable internal and external changes that happen over that time. Another thought occurred to me the other day. I'm thinking about squirming children as you're trying to brush their hair and how much they can't stand it. And I'm imagining in older age, we might appreciate the tender, the loving closeness of someone grooming us. I'm thinking about physical changes that occur over our lifetime. In this brush, I've replaced the bristles with human hair, and like the rings of a tree, they represent the passage of time. In this case, I've used, I had blonde hair as a child, and I had dark hair through most of my life, and I'm envisioning a full head of gray hair eventually. I'm working on it. So we celebrate some physical changes, young girls entering womanhood, childbirth, and then quietly talk about others like menopause and graying hair. I have long hair spilling from this brush in honor and recognition of my own long graying hair and women during COVID unable to go to salons. Many chose to let their gray hair grow out as I did. And I don't think I would have done that had it not been for the pandemic. It went gray and I just felt more myself. And I never planned to let my hair grow gray. I had thought of it as a way of letting go. And I realized that within me I had this idea that as we age, women should either cut their hair or dye it. In addition, with the tintype in the center, I'm nodding back to Victorian times with the social norms then, that women over the age 16 should wear their hair up, lest they seem immoral or flirtatious. In this piece, I have repurposed an antique toiletry jar. I'm not sure what it was before, but it had this beautiful flip lid, and I've placed tintypes inside. The upper tintype with the model's hair stretched outward, it represents trappings of modern life, where many women like myself felt pulled in many directions and pressure to fill many roles all at once. And in the lower tintype, with my model, who's a little bit older, has her hair behind her, and I'm imagining with time, perhaps in age, we can leave some of these expectations behind us in the next part of life. This was made from a Victorian hair receiver. They typically have a hole in the lid. I've placed this tintype over its hole. They were used to collect the sheddings in a hairbrush, and Victorian women would fill the jar with them and later use them to make a pincushion for the inside of a pincushion, or little nests of hair would be used to bolster those very elaborate Victorian hairstyles. I've made this pair of brushes. They're hand-blown glass shapes in the shape of a brush that I filled with hair. I was thinking a little bit about the nautical nature of the ship. I was thinking about a ship in a bottle, time in a bottle, message in a bottle, these little things that last and maybe show up on the sea, I don't know. This piece, called All We Give, is representative of the little bits and pieces that women give of themselves over a lifetime. It could also stand as the lost hours due to grooming in order to fit societal norms. With this brush, I'm honoring the special relationships between step-parents and their stepchildren, in non-bloodline linear relationships. I also just want to mention women who chose not to have children or cannot have children. I know that there's a lot of societal pressure for women, and people ask them questions all the time, like why not, could you not? I think there are all kinds of ways to have family and to relate. In this piece, I have dark colored hair that represents my hair. I have the red colored hair of my stepmother, and blonde that represents my stepdaughter. This piece is called Steppy because at age 4, my stepdaughter got tired of calling stepmama and shortened it to Steppy. And there's nothing better than a crew of middle school students leaning out a yellow school bus going, Steppy, and waving. And I'm really honored to this day that my stepdaughter's friends still call me Steppy. This repurposed mirror represents the ever-changing emotional landscape we experience over our lifetimes, and the meditative and habitual act of grooming, and how much thought it goes on in our heads and what we're working out during that time. I have scraped away the silver backing to reveal this tintype. And I'm also imagining or aiming to reach a point in my life where physical appearance might feel less important and might peel away to reveal a truer self. I've printed color photographs on either side of this fan. I really like it when it's backlit and you can see my model's face shining through on this side of the fan with the hair. Now, all the family members of Samuel Colt, they were not all dead or murderers. This brother, John, this is a little bit nod to his brother John, who started the first silk factory in Paterson, New Jersey, and was known as the king of American silk. So I've used silk fabric. There's a little detail of green ribbon along the fan and along the tassel. Green dye in Victorian times was made from arsenic, so I'm recognizing his sister's suicide. The tassel of the hair is made from, the tassel of the fan is made from human hair. And then a little side note, I inherited a box of sewing materials from my grandmother, and I used a green thread of hers to sew this. Now, I felt with so much of this work involving the Colt family, I could not help but mention Colt families and Samuel Colt's responsibility for America's identity as a gun culture. I have hair spilling from the barrel of the gun for two reasons. One, to remind us that each person lost to gun violence was the child of a mother's child, and also a reminder that our hair continues to grow after death. And finally, at the base of the bureau, I have these nautical materials. The hair, the seaweed-like hair represents women's connection to nature, and the rope represents the societal norms that bind them. And I just want to take a moment. I worked in a really unique way with this piece. I worked with collaborators. I'm not a woodworker or a glassblower or a metalsmith. And when you're making artwork, you start out with this idea in your head that you're trying to execute with all your might that never really comes out how you thought of it. And then working with another person is like this game of telephone, and it becomes theirs also. It was a wonderful way to work, and I'm so thankful that my small community in Southern Vermont is filled with so many talented people. For instance, the self-portrait in the center of that triptych, my photographer assistant Ethan Broussard helped me make that, and my stepdaughter Madeline styled my hair. It was hard to get the braids looking like that. Thank you, Maddie. I worked with glassblower Zach Grace, woodworker Jason Breen, and seamstress Nancy Bell. And that's it that I have to say. So maybe people have questions. I'd be happy to answer any.